Hi, everyone. Today is Wednesday, May 1st. My name is Michelle S. I'm a recovered Al-Anon, and I will be leading this meeting. We want to welcome everyone to our Al-Anon Big Book Recovery Meeting. This is a step speaker meeting that meets every Wednesday night at 5:30 p.m. That's Pacific Standard Time, or 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We study the 12 steps by using the precise instructions out of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous as they relate to us as Al-Anons. Let's get our meeting started. This is the original AA preamble written by the AA Grapevine describing the fellowship in 1940. We study the preamble with an open mind and open heart to consider how it applies to Al-Anon. This helps us to stay focused on the message of recovery the pioneers intended while observing the traditions in action. Through the actions taken based on the instructions of the basic text, we comprehend what the pioneers meant when they described the membership of AA, which is that they worked a program of recovery and they no longer drank. In our case, we no longer obsessed over the alcoholic. Through continuous action and study of these principles, the understanding of the value of the original preamble reveals itself. We ask for your humble consideration of our sincere admiration of the pioneers of Alcoholics Anonymous. The simple hope is that we of Al-Anon will grow into the same clarity and unity that birthed the original 12-step fellowship. Because without all of them, after all, none of us would be here. We are gathered here because we are faced with the fact that we are powerless over alcohol and unable to do anything about it without the help of a power greater than ourselves. We feel that each person's religious views, if any, are his own affair. The simple purpose of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is to show what may be done to enlist the aid of a power greater than ourselves, regardless of what our individual conception of that power may be. In order to form a habit of depending upon and referring all we do to that power, we must first apply ourselves with some diligence. By often repeating these acts, they become habitual, and the help rendered becomes natural to us. We have come to know that as alcoholics, we suffer from a serious disease, for which medicine has no cure. Our condition may be the result of an allergy which makes us different from other people. It has never been permanently cured by any treatment with which we are familiar. The only relief we have to offer is the absolute abstinence, the second meaning of AA. There are no dues or fees. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. Each member squares his debt by helping others to recover. An Alcoholics Anonymous member is an alcoholic who, through the application of and adherence to the AA program, has forsworn the use of any and all alcoholic beverages in any form. The moment he takes such as one drop of beer, wine, spirits, or any other liquid containing alcohol, he automatically loses all status as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. AA is not interested in sobering up drunks who are not sincere in their desire to stay sober for all time. Not being reformers, we offer our experience only to those who want it. We have a way out, which we can absolutely agree on, which we can join in harmonious action. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our program. Those who do not recover are people who will not or simply cannot give themselves to this simple program. Now, you may like our program or you may not, but the simple fact remains that it works, and we believe is our only chance to recover. There is a vast amount of fun included in the AA fellowship. Some might be shocked at our seemingly worldliness and levity, but just underneath there lies a deadly earnestness and full realization that we must put first things first. And with each of us, the first thing is the solution to our alcoholic problem. To drink is to die. Faith must work 24 hours a day in and through us, or we perish. In order to set the tone for this meeting, I ask that we bow our heads in a few moments of silent prayer and meditation followed by the serenity prayer. You can hit star 6 to join me in the serenity prayer, and I will cue you in. Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thy will, not mine, be done. I wish to remind you that whatever is said at this meeting expresses our own individual opinion. As of today and as of this moment, we do not speak for AA as a whole, and you are free to agree or disagree as you see fit. In fact, it is suggested that you pay no attention to anything which might not reconcile with what is in the AA Big Book. If you don't have a Big Book, it is time you bought one. Read it, study it, live with it, follow the directions in it, and learn what it is meant to be in AA. A sponsor is anyone who has had a psychic change as a result of working the steps and has the willingness to work with others. For those looking for a sponsor to guide them through the steps, please stay tuned and have your pens ready to record phone numbers immediately after the meeting. Each Al-Anon group ought to be a spiritual entity having but one primary purpose, that of carrying the message to the Al-Anon who still suffers. This is our primary spiritual aim. Our job as a group is to provide people with a place to learn about and work the steps. It has been our experience that working the steps consistently provides us with a better, saner life. We consider all else to be an outside issue. This includes personal problems. The proper venue for sharing such problems is with a sponsor. This is, after all, where real recovery takes place, in working the steps with a sponsor. We are just so glad we are all here, and we are all here because we are not all there. There will be a period of fellowship after the meeting. If you have questions, if you need a sponsor, if you need to check in or get current, or you want to discuss other literature, please stick around for the fellowship. That would be a better time for these subjects. So this is a step speaker meeting, and it's the first Wednesday of the month. So I'm going to be mainly focusing on steps 1, 2, and 3. Next week, I'll review steps 1, 2, and 3, and we'll focus on 4, 5, and 6. Third week, we'll cover steps 7 through 9. On the fourth Wednesday, we'll cover steps 10 through 12. And because May has a fifth Wednesday, I'll figure out what we're going to cover. All right. So if you have a big book, go ahead and grab it. If you don't, you can always access one online for free at aa.org. If you turn, and you may wonder, if you turn to the title page, it says, The Story of How Many Thousands of Men and Women Have Recovered from Alcoholism. And if you're new to Al-Anon and, you're wondering, okay, so why are we studying alcoholics? A couple of reasons. It's important to understand the illness of the alcoholic in our life. And our 12-step program that we work in Al-Anon is based on the 12 steps that were worked by the founding fathers of Alcoholics Anonymous. And here on the very first page, that title page, is the first promise in the big book. And it's telling us that, people can be recovered from alcoholism. And what that means is that they're not obsessing over alcohol anymore. And what they did was that they followed these principles in this book. They followed the steps that we're going to talk about. Okay, I think I just lost my place. Oh, here we are. Okay, so on the preface, which is page XI, or if you're old school like me, it's Roman numeral 11, it says, because this book has become the basic text for our society and has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery, there exists strong sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. So the first 164 pages in this book, that's the basic text, that has remained largely unchanged since it was published in 1939. And the reason is it works. And it's going to lay out exactly how you get recovered. So it's going to start with step 1 and go all the way through step 12. And we work all the steps and we work them in order because each step is going to build on that previous step. And that's what I mean, and that's what they mean by program. They mean working the steps. Fellowship and going to meetings has its place. Where we find a sponsor, it's where we find newcomers to reach out to. But just going to meetings isn't going to lead to being recovered. If we want to be recovered, we actually have to work the steps. All right, let's move on to the forward to the first edition, page XIII. It says, we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. We think this account of our experiences will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person. And besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all. So I'm going to break this paragraph down a little bit because there's a lot I want to say in it. It's a great paragraph of hope. When they say, have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Excuse me, what they're saying is that it doesn't matter how sick you are. Doesn't matter how sick the alcoholic is, doesn't matter how sick the Al-Anon is. You can get recovered. And it's telling us here that this book is going to show us precisely how we get recovered. That's why this book was written. This book was written so that an alcoholic could, get recovered and then take this book into their community and walk another alcoholic through the steps. And that's what we're meant to do as well in Al-Anon. We're meant to work the steps, and we're meant to take it into our communities and help family members of alcoholics. And this book was originally written for alcoholics, but it's used in something like over 200 other types of 12-step programs as its basic text. And then that last sentence, and besides, we're sure that our way of living has its advantages for all. So we're going to talk about what they mean by our way of living by working the steps. That's where, Al-Anon came out of. All right, let's move on. So I'm going to start by talking about step 1, and you can find the steps on page 59. And step 1 is that we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and our lives had become unmanageable. So unless we're an alcoholic, we're not powerless over alcohol like an alcoholic is. And there are some differences that I'll point out. But we are powerless over trying to control the alcoholic. And our lives have become unmanageable by doing that. And they mean by us when they say that. All right, so let's move on to the doctor's opinion, which is on page XXVIII. And the doctor's opinion was written by Dr. Silkworth. And Dr. Silkworth was not an alcoholic. Now, this book was written by alcoholics for alcoholics, except for this one chapter, which was written by a non-alcoholic, Dr. Silkworth, who was a doctor that in the Depression lost his practice and began working at a hospital that treated alcoholics. And he worked extensively with alcoholics, I believe, up until he died. And he noticed something different about certain alcoholics. He noticed that, and keep in mind, back in this time, they didn't have really much available for people for treatment. Basically, they stuck them in hospitals and sanitariums and tried to dry the alcoholic out and then kind of hope for the best and send them on their way. And so Dr. Silkworth is giving his opinion on what he thinks the problem is. And that's important to understand. The reason being is if you don't understand what the problem is, then you're going to spend a lot of time trying to find solutions to problems you don't have, trying to fix yourself. It says, we believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form. So again, there are differences between alcoholics and Al-Anonics, and we don't have, so alcoholics have a body and a mind component to their illness. We do not have a physical body component to our obsession over the alcoholic, like the alcoholic does. So alcoholics metastasize alcohol differently than other people. And so their body can't handle it. And so when they drink in any amount of alcohol, their body says, more, I need more, right? Whereas somebody who is not an alcoholic can have a couple glasses of wine and go, I'm good. That's not the case for an alcoholic, okay? It ignites their phenomenon of craving, and then they can become powerless to stop. They're just going to keep drinking and drinking and drinking. And unless you're an alcoholic, it's going to be really difficult to understand that. The next paragraph says, frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. The message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. In nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives. So a couple of things I want to say about this. One with regard to the alcoholics, so that frothy emotional appeal. So us trying to help them, particularly if we're not an alcoholic, is not going to be helpful. I can imagine how many times alcoholics have heard, well, just don't drink. If you're, if you can't stop drinking once you start, just don't start. But as we know, the first step isn't, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, just don't drink, right? They're going to need a message, just like we do as an Al-Anonic, that has depth and weight. And what they mean by that is we need somebody who understands what it's like to be powerless over the alcoholic, that's trying to constantly control the alcoholic, because other people would look at it and be like, oh, that's crazy. What are you doing? We need someone who has worked these steps. That's the message of depth and weight that's going to take us through this book, take us through the steps and show us how to get recovered. And what that's going to entail, it tells us right here, that our ideals must be grounded in a power greater than ourselves if they are to recreate their lives. So we're going to have to recreate our lives. And what that means is we're going to have to be doing things differently than we've done in the past. What we've done in the past hasn't worked. They're going to show us in this book a new way of living that's not going to drive ourselves and other people around us crazy. All right, it says men and women drink essentially because they like the effects produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot after a time differentiate the truth from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks which they see others taking with impunity. After they have succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful, with a firm resolution not to drink again. this is repeated over and over, and unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there's very little hope of his recovery. Again, there is a lot here that applies to the alcoholic and to us as well. So I'm going to go through and break it down. So, alcoholics drink because they liked the effect of alcohol, you know. It changed the way that they saw the world and saw themselves. For us, there's definitely something that we get out of trying to control an alcoholic's life. There's definitely some benefit for us, or we think there's some benefit for us. That's why we do it. They say the sensation is elusive. That means that it goes away pretty quickly. So they're always trying to regain that sense of feeling by drinking. And what tends to happen, because people don't become alcoholics overnight, it's a process. And what starts out as something seemingly, just have a few drinks to take the edge off, eventually, if you have that alcoholic gene, can develop into alcoholism, full-blown alcoholism. And when that person wants to stop, right, there probably was a time along that path that they could have stopped if they wanted to, but they didn't want to. So once they pass that point of no return, they're not capable of stopping on their own. And so how it tends to look is, the alcoholic might swear off alcohol. You're like, I'm just not going to drink again. Once I start to drink, that's the problem. I'm just not going to drink again. And what happens is life happens, right? Things that happen to everybody. Work is stressful. Your family is, not doing what you want them to do. Maybe your car breaks down, or you have some expensive home repairs and you get stressed, and they think, I'll just drink a little bit to take the edge off, but that never works. For us, it might be, it might look a little different. Instead of, a substance, it's, all right, I'm done trying to control the alcoholic. I'm going to take up a hobby. I'm going to yoga class. I'm going to do these retreats. I'm going to go ahead and teach yoga. But eventually we can't let it go. We are continually trying to run their program and follow them around, find out where they are, that kind of thing. We always kind of go back to it. Same thing with an alcoholic. Once they fall off the wagon, they drink again until they beat themselves up enough and try and stop, and they kind of stay on this hamster wheel. Like it says here, this is repeated over and over. And unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there's very little hope of his recovery. So unless they do something different, and they're talking about a spiritual solution here and a plan of action, unless they can do that, they're probably going to continue to do that same cycle over and over again. Firm resolution, start to drink, beat themselves up, and start over again and again. And in the sense, we do that same thing as well. We make a firm resolution that we're not going to, follow that alcoholic around or try and figure out what they're doing, or, help them out of all their jams and all that kind of thing. And we might do well for a little bit, but eventually we get kind of talked into and go back to helping them. The next paragraph says, on the other hand, and strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems, he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol, the only effort necessary being that required to follow a few simple rules. So this is a great paragraph of hope, because it's saying, hey, you don't have to live that way. We don't have to live that way. We can be free of that obsession over the alcoholic. We just have to follow a few simple rules. And when they say simple rules, they don't mean, oh, this is going to be like a piece of cake to follow. They mean it's not difficult to understand. The steps are very simple. they're not that complicated. Doesn't mean that it's not going to be hard work. It is. But the steps themselves are pretty simple. They only get hard when we go in and look them up. Let's move down 2 paragraphs. It says, faced with the problem, if the doctor is honest with himself, he must sometimes feel his own inadequacy. Although he gives all that is in him, it is often not enough. One feels that something more than human power is needed to produce the essential psychic change. Though the aggregate of recoveries resulting from psychiatric effect is considerable, we physicians must admit we have made little impression upon the problem as a whole. Many types do not respond to the ordinary psychological approach. So I wanted to include this paragraph because, when Dr. Silkworth wrote this, and again, I'm reading from the 4th edition. In the 1st edition, Dr. Silkworth did not sign the 1st edition. He left it unsigned. He was worried about his standing in the medical community because some of the ideas in this book were considered pretty far out for that time. But in the 2nd edition, he did sign his name. But what he's saying here is that although, therapy and psychiatric help and maybe medication can work for some people, for that chronic alcoholic, it's not going to work. And he's saying that we haven't been able to help these chronic people that come into the hospital, get dried out, where they're never going to drink again, leave the hospital, and in a very short time are drunk again and eventually end up back in the hospital, kind of like this revolving door until they either get spiritual help or pass away. All right, let's move on to let's go to page 20. You may have already asked yourself why it is that all of us became so very ill from drinking. Doubtless you are curious to discover how and why, in the face of expert opinion to the contrary, we have recovered from a hopeless condition of mind and body. If you are alcoholic who wants to get over it, you may already be asking yourself, what do I have to do? So, if you're desperate enough, if you're tired of, how you're dealing with the alcoholic and you want something different, that's what they're talking about, that desperation where you're just like, hey, just tell me what to do. And this book is meant to walk you through those steps, to get you connected to a higher power, which is going to solve your problem. It says, how many times have people said to us, I can take it or leave it alone, why can't he? Why don't you drink like a gentleman or quit? That fellow can't handle his liquor. Why don't you try beer and wine, lay off the hard stuff? His willpower must be weak. He could stop if he wanted to. Or she's such a sweet girl, I think he'd stop for her sake. The doctor told him that if he ever drank again, it would kill him. But there he is, all lit up again. So, in somebody who's a chronic alcoholic, if you tell them, hey, you need to stop drinking or you're going to die, it doesn't work for them. It might work for somebody who is a heavy drinker, and I'm going to cover the different types of drinkers. But let's say somebody's just a heavy drinker, because there's different stages, types of alcoholics or alcoholism. And not everybody is chronic. But somebody who's chronic, if you tell them that if they drink again, they're going to die, they're probably not going to stop. They can't. They cannot stop. Skipping down a couple paragraphs, it says moderate drinkers have little trouble in giving up liquor entirely if they have good reasons for it. They can take it or leave it alone. So they're just talking about a moderate drinker, maybe someone who goes out and parties a little bit, but, they can give it up if they want to. It says, then we have a certain type of hard drinker. He may have the habit badly enough to gradually impair him physically and mentally. It may cause him to die a few years before his time. If a sufficiently strong reason, ill health, falling in love, change of environment, or the warning of a doctor becomes operative, this man can also stop or moderate, although he may find it difficult and troublesome and may even need medical attention. So if there's a good reason to stop drinking, somebody who's a hard drinker, not yet a chronic alcoholic, could possibly stop. Also, someone who, like an Al-Anon, for example, who goes to therapy, they might find relief in that, and they might be able to, stop following the alcoholic around and trying to run their life. But the real deal alcoholic or Al-Anonic may not. So in the next paragraph, it says, but what about the real alcoholic? He may start off as a moderate drinker. He may or may not become a continuous hard drinker, but at some stage of his drinking career, he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. Here's the fellow who has been puzzling you, especially in his lack of control. He does absurd, incredible, tragic things while drinking. He is a real Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. He is seldomly mildly intoxicated. He is always more or less insanely drunk. His disposition while drinking resembles his normal nature, but little. He may be one of the finest fellows in the world, yet let him drink for a day and he frequently becomes disgustingly and evenly dangerous antisocial. He has a positive genius for getting tight at the exact wrong moment, particularly when some important decision must be made or engagement kept. He is often perfectly sensible and well balanced concerning everything except liquor, but in that respect he is incredibly dishonest and selfish. He often possesses special abilities, skills, and aptitude, and has a promising career ahead of him. He uses gifts to build up a bright outlook for his family and himself, and then pulls the structure down on his head by a senseless series of sprees. He is the fellow who goes to bed so intoxicated he ought to sleep the clock around. Yet early the next morning he searches madly for the bottle he misplaced the night before. If he can afford it, he may have liquor concealed all over his house. To be certain, no one gets his entire supply away from him to throw down the waste pipe. As matters grow worse, he begins to use a combination of high-powered sedative and liquor to quiet his nerves so that he can go to work. Then comes the day when he simply cannot make it and gets drunk all over again. Perhaps he goes to a doctor who gives him morphine or some sedative which to taper off. Then he begins to appear at hospitals and sanitariums. Okay, so let's go back. So they're talking about the chronic alcoholic here, the real deal alcoholic that cannot stop. Doesn't mean that they're bad people. They have a disease, they have an illness. And when it comes to drinking, they can't stop. And the difference is, somebody who's a hard alcoholic, it may cause problems in their life, in their marriage. But the difference is that powerlessness to stop, to quit. A hard drinker may be able to quit. But a chronic alcoholic is not going to be able to quit through human aid. And in the same sense, we might not be able to quit our behaviors in the same sense without a power greater than ourselves. We might not be able to do it on our own or through human aid solutions. So human aid solutions would be things that we try to use to take our mind off whatever the alcoholic's doing. I'm going to go out with friends. I'm going to go to a movie. I'm going to go clean the house. I'm going to go do this. It might take our mind off it for a while, but, if you're on these phone lines, it may not have worked long term. Okay, there's something else I wanted to read here. let's go to page 23. It says these observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink, thereby setting the terrible cycle in motion. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than his body. If you ask him why he started on that last bender, the chances are he will offer you any one of 100 alibis. Sometimes these excuses have a certain plausibility, but none of them really make sense in the light of the havoc of an alcoholic's drinking bout creates. They sound like the philosophy of a man who, having a headache, beats himself on the head with a hammer so that he can't feel the ache. If you draw this fallacious reasoning to the attention of an alcoholic, he will laugh it off or become irritated and refuse to talk. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that alcoholics have a body component to the illness and a mind component. So what this paragraph is saying is that the mind component is actually the bigger part, and it's why that if you start drinking and you become powerless, well, then the answer is just don't drink. Just don't pick up that drink. And we're going to learn why that doesn't work here, because the bigger problem is in the mind. Just like with us, we say, well, I'm not going to, bother the alcoholic if they're going to meetings, if they're sponsoring people, or, try and manage their program. I'm going to lay off on that. And then we just go back and do it again. If we go to the bottom of page 23, it says the tragic truth is that if a man be a real alcoholic, the happy day may not arrive. He has lost control. At a certain point in the drinking of every alcoholic, he passes into the stage where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is of absolutely no avail. This tragic situation has already arrived in practically every case long before it is suspected. And in this next paragraph, it's in, if you're following along in the book, it's in italics. And they put that in italics because they wanted us to pay attention to that. It cost more money to have it printed in italics back in the day. So it says the fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable at certain times to bring into consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. So to understand how this works in the alcoholic is it seems like they don't have any willpower. But what happens, and particularly the further along you get in the illness, the sicker you get, that obsession of the mind that you can win out, that you can beat this thing, is going to win out every time over willpower. And all that alcoholic is thinking about is that sense of ease and comfort that comes at once by taking, by drinking. They're not able to see, even though it's probably happened hundreds of times, what's going to happen is that they're going to, start drinking again and create havoc and lose control. So it's like a mental blind spot. And for us, we might think we're being helpful to try and remind them of their meetings or what they need to do and keep tabs on them. And but the thing is we're not helping when we do those things. We're making it harder for them, and we're preventing them from doing what they need to do to be healthy. And, we may think we're doing it. Well, I'm just, I just want to help this person. I have my selfless reasons for, wanting to help them, which isn't really true. We're doing it because it makes our life easier when the alcoholic isn't drinking, right? When the alcoholic's drinking, it can wreak havoc. So, we have selfish reasons of our own for doing those things. Okay, let's see. Let's go on to It says on page 24, I can't remember if I read this or not, so I'm just going to read it again. When this sort of thinking is fully established in an individual with alcoholic tendencies, he has probably placed himself beyond human aid and left locked up, may die, go permanently insane. These stark and ugly facts have been confirmed by legions of alcoholics throughout history. So once you get past that point of no return, once the alcoholic is past that point of no return, they're not going to go back and just be able to drink sociably or pick it up and leave it. That's not going to happen. And they're going to need a program, spiritual program and a plan of action, or they're just going to continue to do what they do until they, end up dead or in a hospital. But on page 25, it says there is a solution. Almost none of us like the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, the confession of our shortcomings, which the process requires for its successful consumption. But we saw that it really worked in others, and we had come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of a life as we had been living it. When therefore we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved, there was nothing left for us but to pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. We have found much of heaven, and we have been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence, of which we had not even dreamed. So when we get sick enough of trying to, when we get tired enough of following the alcoholic around or trying to run their life, when we're sick of it, that's when we come, when we just don't want to do it anymore. The great fact is just this and nothing less, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experience, which have revolutionized our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and towards God's universe. The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. So, what they're telling us there is that if we show up and we do the work, we're going to get a daily reprieve from that obsession around the alcoholic. But if we're not willing to show up and we're not willing to do the work, then we're not going to get that daily reprieve. And we're going to go around making ourselves and other people in our lives crazy. On the bottom of page 25, it says, if you are seriously alcoholic as we were, we believe there's no middle of the road solution. We were in a position where life was becoming impossible, and if we had passed into the region from which there is no return through human aid, we had but two alternatives. One was to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we could, and the other is to accept spiritual help. So if the alcoholic is past the point of no return, they can't just decide what steps are going to work, right? And pick and choose which one. It's not going to work. You have to work them all, just like we have to work them all in order, precisely as they're meant to be. And that's what they mean by spiritual help. Okay, so let me just look at the time here. Okay, good. Let's go on to page 44. We agnostics. Sometimes people, well, how do I know if I'm chronic or if the alcoholic is chronic? So if you go to that first paragraph, about 3 sentences it says, if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience can conquer. So if the alcoholic has said, or once they start drinking, they're powerless to stop, and or they say that they're going to quit and never drink again and always go back to it, they're probably a chronic alcoholic. For us, if we say we're going to, stop trying to run their life and the lives in front of us, because around us, because it bleeds into other areas of our life. It's not just we don't try and, control the alcoholic. We try and overinsert ourselves at work. We act in very codependent ways. We try to control other situations in our lives. And if we continue to do that, even though we've sworn we're never going to do that again, it might be an indication that, a 12-step program would be helpful. All right, let's go to page 45. It says lack of power. That was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves. Obviously, but where and how will we define this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. So that's what this book is meant to do. It's meant to get us connected to a higher power that's going to solve our problem, because we can't do it on our own anymore. On page 47, it says we needed to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe, or am I willing to believe that there is a power greater than myself? As soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. So this is step 2, what we've been talking about here, which is that step 2 states we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Now, a higher power, and this is where some people find kind of a stumbling block, it just has to be something eternal and outside yourself. It doesn't have to be the God that you grew up with. It doesn't have to be anybody else's conception of God. It's your own conception of a higher power. And it doesn't matter if you're religious, if you're agnostic, you're atheist. Your higher power answers all prayers regardless. And if people were honest when they came to program, particularly Al-Anon, if we were honest when we came to program, we would admit that we were really agnostic because we weren't allowing God to work in our lives. We maybe prayed, hey, God, please fix this alcoholic, and he didn't, so, what good is God? But getting connected to our higher power is going to show us what the right next step is, and going to help us to, lead a sane and productive life. And when, you first get started working the steps, it doesn't have to believe that you have to have this 100% faith. You just have to have a little willingness to believe, well, my sponsor seems to be doing pretty well and doesn't seem to be obsessing about the alcoholic in their life. Maybe I'll give this thing a try. That's really all you need to get started. That's that cornerstone that they're talking about, that foundation to build upon. And then step 3 is that we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. So step 1, 2, and 3 are decision steps. We're making a decision to turn our life and our will over to the care of God as we understood him. We're not going to know how to do that. We're going to learn how to do that through working the rest of the steps. Okay? So if we go to page 60, it says our description of the alcoholic, the chapter 2, the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives, the second part of step 1. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. That's the first part of step 1. And C, that God could and would if he were sought. Being convinced we were at step 3, that God could and would if he were sought, that's step 2. And being convinced we were at step 3, which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to the care of God as we understood him. Just what do we mean by that? Just what do we do? Well, it means we're going to learn how to lean into God. Instead of leaning in the chaos in our head, stewing about all the things that the alcoholic did or didn't do, or other people in our lives and getting more mad and resentful, we're going to learn to turn that over to our higher power and to lean into their direction instead of ours. On page 62, it says, this is the how and why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. Next, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. He is the principal. We are his agents. He is the father, and we are his children. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arc through which we passed to freedom. So basically, we're going to fire ourselves as trying to run the show, because we're not doing a very good job of it. We're not fixing anybody, and by trying to fix other people, we avoid dealing with our stuff. And everybody has their stuff. None of us are perfect. So on page 63, we get what's called the third step promises. And the thing to keep in mind about working the steps is we generally work them quickly, because the sooner we get, a solution, the sooner we can start to feel better. You don't necessarily have to work through all the steps to start feeling better. A lot of people start feeling better by step 3, and even better as they get through the rest of the steps. And so on page 63, it says, when we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer, being all powerful. He provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. More and more we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. As we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of his presence, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. We were reborn. And so, just thinking about losing that sense of fear and worry, always worrying about the alcoholic and what's going to happen to them. That's a huge load to be, carrying around, and it can certainly feel, like a huge relief, like we're reborn, essentially when that is lifted. Okay, so we are getting down to the end here. Seventh tradition, I should say next week we'll review steps 1 through 3 briefly, and then I will go into steps 4, 5, and 6. Seventh tradition, every OA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. This group does not have a payment structure in place and currently requires no overhead expenses. If you would like to fulfill tradition 7, please direct contributions directly to the Al-Anon World Service Office by visiting alanon.org. For questions about this meeting, or if you're looking for a sponsor, please send emails to Al-Anon Big Book Recovery @gmail.com. Recordings can be accessed on YouTube by searching Al-Anon Step Speaker in the YouTube search box. If you are interested in other Al-Anon meetings that follow the Big Book, please visit AlanonBigBookSolutionGroup.org. On page 164, it says, our book is meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little. God will constantly disclose more to you and to us. Ask him in your morning meditation what you can do each day for the man who is still sick. The answers will come if your own house is in order, but you obviously cannot transmit something you haven't got. See to it that your relationship with him is right, and great events will come to pass for you and countless others. This is the great fact for us. Abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to Him and your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then. Now let's have a moment of silence for the Al-Anon who still suffers, followed by the Lord's Prayer or a prayer of your own choosing said in silence. And you can, if you'd like to join me in the prayer, you can hit *6 to unmute. Who loves us and keeps us sane. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, now and forever.
Amen.
All right.